Let's get started. I want to prepare you for a fallacy which I call the real soon now fallacy. The real soon now fallacy is this. When we look at technology, technology typically disappoints us in the beginning. Let's get 5 years back. 5 short years ago, 2013, Google Glass came to the market. And I can't see you guys, but I presume some of you have seen Google Glass. I was at Google when we released Google Glass. I was wearing it on campus for 6 months. And let me tell you, as someone who was wearing Google Glass, it was too expensive, the battery life was terrible, the features were mediocre, and you looked like an idiot. This here is my mom, literally my mom, wearing Google Glass. And briefly after this, I took this picture. This picture came out. These are 3 of the most important and probably most famous Silicon Valley investors, including Mark Andreessen, wearing Google Glass. And we started calling these people glass holes. Now, here's what's interesting. 5 years later, 5 short years later, we take something we all made jokes about, and the Chinese release 18,000 of these devices at their border. What this device does is, it does image recognition on you, so it looks at your face, it looks your face up in a database of 100,000 criminals within 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second, and tells you if the person in front of you is a criminal we're looking for or not. Which is really interesting to think about, right? Because what happened is, the device, this is Google Glass, this Chinese version, didn't change all that much. What had changed is, it got a little bit better, and AI came into play. Here's another example. 2013, Amazon launched Amazon Prime Air as a demo. So the first time we flew these drones delivering parcels. When I saw this video, you can actually go back into my Twitter timeline, you will see I made fun of this video. Because I mean, look at this. This is retarded. Like, this is a tiny little drone. Like, all it can carry is probably this clicker. It made no sense whatsoever. 5 years later, if you go to Dubai, you now can fly in an autonomous drone from hotel to hotel. Fully electric, people carrying autonomous drone. It's really important to understand this. Technology disappoints us in the beginning and then gets really crazily good. If you're not taking anything out of my talk today, which I totally understand, you have a long day behind you, and again, like the beer is waiting for you, I know that. But remember one thing, one single thing, that tomorrow will look dramatically different than today, and you need to be prepared for that. And I'm saying tomorrow, not tomorrow in 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, I'm saying tomorrow, the day after today. And we're going to explore this today in my talk, on how this future will look like, and I will prepare you for this future. Ernest Hemingway once wrote a book. It's called The Sun Always Rises. In this book, you'll find a quote. The quote is, "How did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly." And gradually and then suddenly is how we're seeing technology developing today. This is really important for you to understand. Now, here's a way you can cheat, and this is beautiful. Because you don't even need to be creative to see the future. All you need to do is you need to open your eyes. Because as William Gibson, the science fiction author, once said, the future is already here. It is just not evenly distributed. You can see the future of tomorrow. You just need to pay a lot of money for it. And you need to look for it. If you wanted to know how VR looks today, 10 years ago, you could buy that future. It cost you $1 million US. But it was there. All right. So let me steep you in what we call exponential thinking. If you remember back to your math class, this is a classic exponential function, a doubling every time period. You go from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, you draw it up. We call this the hockey stick curve. Very quick show of hands. Entrepreneurs in the room? Okay, this is your revenue slide. Take a picture right now, and then just write some numbers against it. I'm not joking. And probably, of course, the most best known exponential trend we have is Moore's Law. Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, 50 years ago said the number of transistors on a densely integrated circuits doubles every 2 years. There was an observation by seeing what happened in the past. And he said, I believe this to be true for the next 10 years. And it has been true for the last 50 years. And of course, this is not a physical law, right? It's important to understand. This is us humans pushing progress forward at an exponential rate. Now let me show you how this looks like. I'm sure you have seen, or some of you surely have seen this computer. It's called Raspberry Pi. It's a small computer. It's a full-scale computer. It can run Windows on this machine, cost you $35 and has 6.2 gigaflops. To put this a little bit into perspective, what you can buy today for the price of 2 boxes of beer, let's talk about beer here. For 2 boxes of beer, you now get 39 times the compute power of a Cray 1. The Cray 1 was released in the mid-70s. Each of those Cray 1s, each of those 39 Cray 1s, which you can now buy for the price of 2 boxes of beer, has more compute power than NASA had total to put the man on the moon. So for the price of 2 movie tickets, at least in the US, you now get nearly 40 times the compute power we had to put the man on the moon. And of course, you need to believe we ever put a man on the moon, but that's a different story. You can look that up on YouTube. Our co-founder, Ray Kurzweil, once formulated something called the law of accelerating returns. It's a pretty dense paper. I want to show you the most important graph, which most of you have probably never seen before. What Ray did is, he asked himself an interesting question. He said, okay, so if we have Moore's law, and Moore's law is an exponential, and we're taking it to its logical conclusion, we know that it needs to stop someplace, because remember, number of transistors on a square inch doubles every 2 years. If you take it to its conclusion, transistors become subatomic in size. It doesn't work anymore. So they flatten out, these S-curves flatten out. So what he did is, he looked at data points and he said, how many calculations can I perform per 1 second per $1,000? And what he found is that we have pushed Moore's law, the underpinnings of Moore's law, forward for the last 110 years on an absolutely perfect exponential curve. Because what we do is, when the technology starts to flatten out, when it becomes too mature, we start doing something with a new technology, right? So we went from vacuum tubes to transistors, from transistors to integrated circuits, and now we're moving into quantum. And the sole reason why this chart is interesting is for one particular reason, because you can use this chart to predict the future. When you take this chart and you extrapolate it into the future, and you believe this chart to be true in the future, and there's currently not a single reason why you should not believe this, you can determine the point in time when your $1,000 iPhone will be computationally as smart as a human being, which happens in 11 years. Your iPhone number, what is it, 14, I guess, 15, 16, will be computationally as smart as you are. And then it gets interesting, right? Because we know every 2 years a doubling. So 2 years later, 2 human beings, then 4, 8, 16. By 2050 to 2060, you will have 7.4 billion human brains in a single cell phone. That is to say, tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. Tomorrow, the phone in your pocket will be smarter than you are. My wife tells you that's true for me today. Well, it's a long-standing dispute. Now, let me show you something interesting. We see these exponential trends happening in other industries as well, and they have really weird consequences. I want to show you 3 industries where I think that what happens there in terms of exponential trends will change the way we live our lives here on this planet. The first one is energy. Energy today is largely carbon-based. So we generate energy by burning oil, coal, and gas. The energy of the future will be renewable. There's absolutely no question about it. And for a simple reason, which is price performance. And let's look at solar. Solar, a kilowatt hour of power for solar in the mid-70s cost us about $80 a kilowatt hour. To give you an idea how much that is, the cost for us to produce energy, the cheapest form of energy, is roughly 30 cents. This is way too expensive. But then the price came down and down and down and down on an exponential curve. And by 2015, in California, in the US, without any subsidies, the price dropped to 30 cents a kilowatt hour. The price is now the exact same price we pay for the cheapest and dirtiest form of energy. Now it gets interesting, because a year later, in Dubai, we're now producing energy in a new 800 megawatt solar power facility for 3 cents a kilowatt hour. The leader of the largest German energy company is on the record to say, by 2040, they will not sell you energy anymore. Energy will become free. which is really interesting if you think about that. Because if you think about how many problems in the world hinge on us having cheap energy, and then we get free energy. There's something called Swanson's Law, which dictates that for every doubling in solar panels installed, the price drops by another 20 to 50%. Economies of scale and scope. What this means is that once you reach parity, once you reach the 30-cent price point, in more and more countries, the price will drop down to zero in all of these countries. There's now 30 countries in the world, including Mexico, for example, where the price of energy, solar energy, is cheaper, way cheaper than conventional energy. And now here's an interesting thing. Think about which are the poorest nations in the world, and think about how many sunshine hours these nations have. The world's powers might change. Here's something else. What you see here is work from a German PhD. What they did is they calculated the hypothetical case of how big does a solar panel needs to be to provide the world's energy consumption. What you see on the left-hand side, labeled Welt, that is all it takes to power the world's energy consumption as it stands today. Which is interesting to think about, because we build our business models, our world, every model we have on the idea of scarcity. There's only so much oil we can harvest. There's only so much coal we can dig up. Whereas if we leverage technology, we can create a world of abundance. And that world will look and function very differently. Let me show you something else. Let's talk genetics. Very quick show of hands. Anyone here in genetics, DNA? A little bit? Biology? Not so much? Okay, let me show. Perfect. This is for you. Let me show you why DNA is so interesting. I want to talk about DNA sequencing. So DNA is, when you do anything in genetics, has two sides. Reading, sequencing, and writing, which is, we typically use a technology today called CRISPR-Cas9. I want to focus on reading. For a very simple reason again, price, performance. The first time we sequenced a full human genome was 1999. It was called the Human Genome Project, a multinational effort. Took us 7 years to sequence a single genome, 3.2 billion base pairs. This is 1999. 2018, we removed 7 zeros. The price is roughly $200, $300. This is the steepest drop in price we've ever seen in any technology, bar none. This has never been seen before. This currently falls 7 times the rate of Moore's law. Now, when you see something like this, and by the way, if you look at any technology, one thing I would always look at is what are the price performance curves look like? Because when you look at this, you should ask yourself 2 questions. Question number one is, where does this go? And you ask experts and they will tell you the price for sequencing a genome will drop to pennies. And eventually become so cheap that a colleague of mine jokes about this. They say, every time you flush your toilet, we will sequence your genome and give you a full health report, because the water in the toilet is more expensive than sequencing the genome. And then the question becomes, what do you do with a sequenced genome for a few cents? Well, I show you. This is a company we invested in, Mexican founder, called Miraculous. What they're doing is they have a test where they take a simple blood test and can detect 12 different types of cancer in your bloodstream earlier than any other test on this planet today. The test costs $200 to administer, it takes 20 minutes. They're going to change the way we are thinking about cancer detection. Who here is below the age of 25 or has kids below the age of 25? You will not die of cancer anymore. This is no joke. Most cancers will be eradicated, either because we treat them super early, or we will actually eradicate the particular type of cancer. This is a really interesting future we are moving into. But I want to show you something interesting. Technology has a weird, dark side. This here is a friend of mine, a New York-based artist called Heather Dewey Hogboard. And she has a project, which is an art project, and I let her talk about it herself.
We don't know yet how our DNA might be used against us in the future.
New York artist Heather Dewey Hogboard.
One artist in New York is making 3D models of people's faces, people that she's never met.
She calls the project stranger visions. The strangers are people whose genetic material she finds on the sidewalks and subways of New York City.
How much can I actually find out about you from something that you accidentally leave behind?
Unpack what you saw. Heather literally picks up cigarette butts on the streets of New York. On a cigarette butt is your saliva. In your saliva is your DNA. She extracts the DNA using a technique the FBI has mastered 25, 30 years ago. If you're watching CSI on television, it's the same thing. And then she sequences this DNA in the $270 sequencer and works with an advanced genetics testing lab to reconstruct your facial features, because of course your facial features are encoded in your DNA. The color of your eye, color of your hair, shape of your skull, etc. She puts this into a 3D model and then prints these 3D masks. Again, that is to say, tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. My DNA on this bottle here, you can today sequence and you can determine what the chance of me is of getting Alzheimer's. So the next time you go to your insurance agent and they offer you a cup of coffee, you probably don't want to drink that cup of coffee. Yeah, you're laughing. I don't think this is funny. It's a really interesting, weird world. So here's the interesting thing, why I'm showing you this. First of all, I want to freak you out. But secondly, there is not a single jurisdiction on this planet where, to the best of my knowledge, this is illegal. More importantly, I speak to lots and lots of politicians about this. I'm actually going to fly to Germany to speak to the German Bundestag about this. There's not a single jurisdiction where I see people having a conversation about this. And this is possible today. This is not science fiction, not something you watch on television. This is an artist in New York. All right. Let's go into the third area. AI, artificial intelligence. You can use AI like IBM Watson to detect lung cancers on CT and MRI scans better than any human being in complicated cases. In complicated cases, you have a human has about a 50% chance to detect a cancer on a CT or MRI scan. IBM Watson has a 75% chance of detecting this. The Mayo Clinic, which is the leading hospital in the US, deems it unethical to not use IBM Watson. I'm sure you have heard of AlphaGo. Go is the hardest board game we have ever invented as humans. The amount of moves in the game of Go exceeds the atoms in this universe. It is not a game you can play by math. It is a game you need to play by feel. And yet, Google trained an AI to play with this game, and this AI won 4 out of 5 games. And then you can feed art into an AI, and the AI creates new art, which is weird because we always thought that creativity is the domain of the human being. And well, it might not be. By the way, I also think they fed some LSD or cocaine or something into that art, but let me show you where it gets weird, because I like to show you weird things. This is work from a Chinese group of PhD students. This is published work. What they did is, they took 750 pictures of Chinese inmates, so people who have been convicted of a crime, and then they took 750 pictures of just average Chinese people, and they fed them into an AI, and what they did is they ran a facial recognition algorithm over these pictures. This is similar when you go through a gate at an airport, for example. And then they did something absolutely weird. They went to the AI and said, here's a picture of a person you have not seen before. Tell me if you think that person is a criminal or not, based on how they look. Which is weird. That makes no sense whatsoever. And yet, with an 89% accuracy, the AI could tell you if that person is a criminal or not. So make no mistake, by the way, there's a correlation and causation. This is really important to understand. There's a difference, right? But this is Minority Report. The precogs. It's a really weird world we're moving into. This here shows you, this is a graph which was literally just published. What the graph basically shows you, this is a logarithmic scale, shows you the advancements of AI over the last 6 years, only 6 years. Again, logarithmic scale. So these are different types of AI and how they're basically progressing. If you were to paint this on a normal graph, not a log scale, it looks like this. It goes gradually, and then goes up. We have seen a 300,000 times improvement in capacity of AI, in the ability of an AI, in the last 6 years. 300,000 times. It moves on an exponential curve. So the next doubling, the next year, will see a 600,000 times. And then it doubles again and again and again. Which leads to really interesting outcomes. I don't know if you've seen this video, but this is a really interesting, weird video. It should make you think about whom do you trust and what do you trust?
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you, and stay woke, bitches.
Scary, huh? You don't know whom or what you can trust. This was a set of AIs. There's one AI which matches your voice to the voice of an existing living person as long as you have enough data samples from them, which of course, if you're a politician, there's enough of the voice outside in the world. There's another AI which matches your facial expression, which gets mapped in 3 dimensions onto a virtual version of that person. And then there's a third AI which matches this whole thing together and creates a pretty darn good impression of whoever you want to impersonate. So imagine you see this on television. Whom do you trust? It's a weird world. Here's the thing. Albert Allen Bartlett, who taught these exponential trends at the University of Boulder, once said the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. What he means by that is very simple. The world around us, the observable universe, is linear to us. The day has 24 hours, the seasons come and go. It is a very linear world to us. We are really good at understanding linear trends. Do this exercise with me. Imagine you take 30 linear steps, one step after the other. How far do you get? Of course you know it, 30 meters. If I were to go outside with you and were to ask you, how far do you get? You could point to that point in space. Now imagine we're moving on a technology curve, 30 exponential steps. Every step is twice as far as your last. So you go from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. How far do you get? 30 steps. Simple, right? Well, not quite. It's 1 billion meters. But even if I tell you it's 1 billion meters, how far do you feel 1 billion meters is? That is really hard. It's 25 times around planet Earth. It is from here to the moon, back from the moon, and halfway to the moon again. It demonstrates 2 important things. If you have something which was analog, linear, it gets to 30. If it moves on an exponential curve, it's digital, you get to 1 billion. But more importantly, you need to sit down to do the math because you cannot trust your gut to understand what exponential trends look like. This is the reality. Technology moves on an exponential curve. I showed this to you in computing, AI, energy, and genetics. Your thinking is linear. In this curve are 3 important parts. Number 1, disappointment. We talked about this at the very beginning. You look at Google Glass and you want it to be better, but it is not, and you're disappointed. And when you're disappointed, you're dismissing it. You say it isn't good, it won't be good, because you cannot do the gut feel checking. Then you get to this moment where we call the iPhone moment. Steve Jobs, 11 years ago, gets on stage, shows you the iPhone, and you understand that a phone isn't a phone anymore. A phone is a computer, and a phone has glass and no buttons. And then you get to chaos and amazement, where you can't keep up with the changes we're seeing in the world. If you stay on this line, if you stay in your thinking linearly, this is your certain path to doom for you as an individual, your communities, your societies, and your companies. I want to talk about disappointment a little bit more because it's so important. And I'm not talking about crying hipsters. I want to talk about this here. Any one of you is using Siri, Google Now, Alexa, Cortana, Bixby, right? A few of us. In a lot of cases, this is Star Trek. I grew up on Star Trek. I can talk to my phone. This is crazy. But in most cases, it is not good yet. Because in most cases, it sounds an awful lot like this.
What time is my appointment on Sunday evening?
You have 4 appointments last Tuesday at 12 a.m.
I said, what time is my appointment on Sunday evening?
You have 4 appointments last Tuesday at 12 a.m.
I'm not asking about Tuesday.
I don't know what you mean by, I'm not asking about Tuesday. How about a web search for it?
This is what we call the classic Siri fail. Now here's the interesting thing about Siri. And I'm using Siri as a proxy, okay? It's the same for all these systems. Siri is only 7 years old. Of course it sucks. Of course it's bad. It's a kid. But here's the interesting thing. Wait. Don't construe this in the way you would just laugh about this. I'm saying it's 7 years old. It has nothing to do with it. This is a reference. Anyway. So it's doubling every year. It is currently doubling in capacity every single year. So the question for me becomes, how good is Siri when it's a teenager? How good is Siri in 7 to 10 years? And when you ask anyone, do this exercise. Go to your families and ask them. You say it doubles every year. How good is it after 7 years? I guarantee you, the number one answer you will get is they will tell you it's 14 times as good. Because it doubles. But it isn't. And you're all exponential thinkers now, so you know that it's going to be 128 times as good. But now the question becomes, what does that even mean? What does it mean if Siri is 128 times as good? Now you need to do the hard work. Now you need to deconstruct what Siri is. First principles. Siri is voice recognition, understanding what you say, cognition, understanding what you mean, and then a bunch of services it connects to. So you do this and you multiply this out by 100 or 128, and you will find that Siri in 7 to 10 years is better than any human on this planet in understanding you. And then it becomes interesting because if you run a call center, your call center is gone. I was in Peru, in Lima, with the CEO of a company called Atento. This is the largest call center operator in Peru. They employ the second most people in Peru after the government. And the guy is smart, the CEO is smart. He looks around and says, none of these people, we are in a call center facility with 12,000 people. And he looks around and says, none of these people will do call center operations anymore. I want them to do other things. They will still have a job, but they will do other things. I was recently with a German car manufacturer, and they showed me proudly the car dashboard of the future. And I asked them an interesting question. I said, when does this come into production? I said, it's coming 2018. It's now in production. I said, it's interesting. How long will it stay in production? I said, 7 years. And I looked at them and said, you realize that I don't need a car dashboard anymore. Why on earth do I want to have a radio in a car with buttons on it when I can talk to my car and just say, hey, car, play me some 80s music, and the car says, yeah, of course, I cue that up for you. And today, I can forget stuff. Today I can come to my wife and say, hey, honey, I forgot to bring the milk on my way back home. Tomorrow, Siri will say, Pascal, I told you 3 times on the way back to pick up the milk, you liar. We are rapidly moving into a world which looks dramatically different today than it does tomorrow. I want you to make sense of this. And the only way you can make sense of change in this world is you just plunge into it, move with it, and dance. So I want to dance with you now. This insight is so trivial and so important to understand that I cannot stress that enough. Once a technology becomes digitized or digitally enabled, it starts to move on an exponential curve. Your biggest business opportunities, bar none, is if you find something which was analog and you turn it into a digital good. Because the moment you do that, everything changes. The reason why Silicon Valley currently pours billions of dollars into healthcare, largely analog businesses being digitized rapidly, and something they call ag tech, agricultural technology, goddamn old farming. Another industry, which is a $1 trillion industry worldwide, is currently being massively transformed by becoming digitized. Singularity University's founder, Peter Diamandis, developed a model called the 6 Ds of disruption. It's a beautiful model to explain where an industry is going. I want to explain to you the model by using this example. This gentleman, when he was 25 years old, invented the thing he holds up there. That thing is the first digital camera. The first digital camera, as you can see, is pretty unwieldy. It's a big thing. It had 100 by 100 megapixel, 100 by 100 pixels, 0.01 megapixels. It recorded in black and white only. You record it on the cassette tape you see there in the corner, and it took 27 seconds to take the picture, so not quite your Instagrammable moment. Here's how this works. You digitize it. You take something which was analog, film, and which is largely a chemistry, and you digitize it. In the beginning, it's deceptive. The first digital camera, as you saw, really big, really crappy, 0.01 megapixels, is a bad product. It is objectively a bad product. But it moves on an exponential curve. The second generation had 0.02 megapixels. Still a very bad product. 0.04, 0.08. It takes a while until it crosses the lines. But when it crosses the lines, it becomes disruptive. When you had 2 megapixels, you had a camera which was good enough to do a 9 by 13 centimeter print. I bought a digital Xs, Canon digital Xs, $499. I never bought film again. And then you get into a world where you dematerialize. A lot of technology, we remove the technology, the hardware, and turn it into software. You're not currently having a $500 camera. What you have is $1 worth of hardware, and the rest is software. That means we're demonetizing it. We're sucking money out of the system. You're not buying a camera anymore. You're not buying film anymore. You're not processing the film anymore. All that is gone. But we're democratizing it because every one of you now has a camera, which was not the case before. It's interesting to figure out where is your industry in this model. Let's talk about disruption. This guy here, Clayton Christensen, wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. The Innovator's Dilemma was released about 25 years ago and was the first, and to this day is pretty much the only model we have to explain disruption. I want to show you that we're moving into a world where this model doesn't hold up anymore, and it becomes really scary. Anyone here, let me quickly do show of hand. Anyone here from a big company, not entrepreneurs, big companies? Because you guys are now fucked. Okay. No, there's a big opportunity for you here, don't get me wrong. So let's first talk about innovation versus disruption. Innovation is doing the same things, but better. So innovation is me buying a washing powder, and next year that washing powder becomes ultra white, and then the year after it becomes ultra white, and then it becomes super white, and whatever. This is innovation. Every once in a while, we do something new, but it hasn't yet become disruptive. So instead of washing powder, we now do washing liquid. It's a new thing, but it really doesn't disrupt the market. Disruption is doing new things which make the old things obsolete. This is where disruption comes from. When you do something which is new and makes the old thing obsolete. Let me show you the model. The model is this. You've got time on one axis, and you've got performance. This is what you as a customer care. In my washing powder, it needs to wash to a certain degree. It needs to get a certain amount of stains out of my clothing. In a camera, it needs to have a certain amount of pixels, or a certain quality of the picture. There's a line which we call the customer need line. This is a line where we say, if you get this customer need line, the customer is happy. Like, you give me washing powder which washes, most of my stuff pretty white, that's okay. And then you've got the incumbent. This is the company which has been in the market for a while. And what they're doing is, at one point, they crossed the customer need line in the past. And then they're doing what is called sustaining innovation. Because the customer asks for it. The customer says, yeah, give me the washing powder, but I want you to make it a little bit better. And so you make it a little bit better, and you make it a little bit better, and so on and so on. And the insight Clayton had is, in this model, the new entrant is somewhere here. So they do something which is not good, but it has the potential to displace this thing which it attacks. The big mistake we made before Clayton Christian was that we thought that the new entrant needs to be as good as the existing company. And that's wrong. Because the new entrant only needs to be as good as the customer need line. The moment that hits, everything shifts. Let me show you how this works with a very familiar example. Mobile phones. We started out with mobile phones, probably by the second phone from the left. We were at the point where we said it's the customer's good enough line. You had enough battery life, it had enough features, it did what it wanted to do. And then you go into sustaining innovation. So you make it a little bit better and it becomes a little bit smaller and the battery becomes better and so on and so on. At the height of that craziness, this phone came out. This is a Nokia N95. I had one of those. 2 cameras, which were pretty crappy. You could do a little bit of internet on it. You could text with it. It had 2 weeks of battery life. Take that iPhone, 2 weeks. But then something interesting happened in the same time. Smartphones, the first generation and second generation smartphones came on the market. Not the iPhone, smartphones. And they were crappy. Their battery life was half a day. Their features weren't great. The form factor wasn't great yet. But some people bought them because some people said it's important to me to have my calendar with me or my full address book or for me to write an email while I'm on the run. And then something new comes, this guy here. And this guy hits the good enough line. The good enough line, for example, for your battery life is not 2 weeks. The good enough line is 1 day. Because if I have a day's worth of battery life, I can go up and like in the evening and just unplug my phone. This is what we do to this day. But then I get all this other stuff. I get apps. I have the internet on there. I can play games on it. And it becomes disruptive. So disruptive so that Nokia goes bankrupt 3 years after the iPhone comes onto the market. And then the iPhone itself moves on a line where it has sustaining innovation, right? So it becomes a little bit better and the form factor changes a tiny bit, but it doesn't really disrupt anymore. Now I want to look at this model again and want to ask you a question. The electric car, is the electric car disruptive or sustaining innovation? Sustaining innovation, right? Because it's just a car. It's just like we changed the engine. Well, let me show you something. So when you look at a car and you ask yourself, what is the good enough line? For most people, they say when in a car, it needs to look good and all this kind of stuff. But the 2 factors that like everybody cares about is speed and range. Here's an interesting insight in terms of speed when you look at the good enough line. In California, where I live now, the speed limit on the highway is 65 miles an hour. If you drive above 80 miles an hour, you will get actually put in front of a judge. If you drive up to 80 miles, it's what is called a misdemeanor. So you just get a ticket. So everybody drives 80 miles an hour, but nobody drives above 80 miles an hour. So your good enough line is, let's say, 85 miles an hour, because nobody ever drives faster than 80 miles an hour. It's crazy. And then your range, we know that for most people range, like if you have about 200 miles range, it's way enough. 99.98% of drives of private people are like within 50 miles. So this is how electric cars started out, right? In the beginning, they were crappy. They didn't have either range nor speed. But some people bought them because they were green and they were probably nicer to drive and they could park them anywhere and you could just charge them. You didn't need to go to a filling station, a gas station. But then Tesla comes out. And Tesla does something interesting. They're not just filling the good enough line, they're exceeding it in every single dimension. Now I have a car which has at least the same range as my normal car. I have a car which has 2 trunks because the battery is at the bottom. So I've got more storage room. I've got a car which has a higher safety rating than any car on the planet has ever achieved. I can software update the car. It has less than 80 moving parts. Compare that with about 2,500 moving parts in a normal car. It has a better mileage per kilowatt hour than any other moving object in terms of car on this planet, and it accelerates faster than any car on this planet. It gets better, which is really weird. Here's an interesting story. Has any one of you heard of insane mode? So the way Tesla looks at their cars is, they literally think about a car much more like a cell phone on wheels. And when you think about a car as a cell phone on wheels, what you do is you send software updates to it, like your cell phone. One day, Elon Musk from Tesla wakes up and thinks about what some engineer told him. One engineer told him, listen, we have so much capacity in the engine, we over-engineered the engine and the drivetrain. And we could do something with that. So he's like, oh, this is really fun, let's do something with it. So he invents a software update which gets installed on your car, which one day you wake up, you get into your car, and there's a new button. And the button says insane mode. And when you press the button, the car accelerates from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles an hour, in 3.2 seconds, which makes it the 5th fastest car on the road today, only to be beaten by a Ferrari, a McLaren, and a few other supercars. But that's not the end of it, because 2 weeks later, the engineers, while they're testing this feature, say, oh, wait, we can actually make this even better. And they roll out another update. So one day you wake up and there's another button in the car which says ludicrous mode. And you press that button and your car accelerates in 2.27 seconds to 100 kilometers an hour. There's not a single car on this planet which is a serial manufactured car, not like a race car, which accelerates that speed. Let me show you what the face of disruption is, how this looks like. And please be aware, there is some swearing in this video. So if you're not okay with swearing, I guess you have left already because I swear like crazy. But there's some swearing in the video. This is how it looks like.
I'm really mad that the option is insane. Like, it's not like just...
Why, that's perfect. Isn't that good?
That's a random, like... What's the
feature? The car is insane, right? Everyone thinks the car is insane, so why not have, you know, like an insane mode, right?
That makes sense.
So you just come to like a complete stop.
All right.
And then before you know it, you just jam on
Oh shit, Brooks! What the fuck?
That's 70 miles an hour.
Brooks, oh shit. First of all, you can't fucking do that to people. Like, you gotta give people fair warning.
Why?
Like, you can't fucking just say,
yeah, you can.
Brooks.
What?
I think I shitted in your seat. No,
Exactly.
So you're going to go insane?
Yeah, go ahead and press the insane button.
I'm not going to throw up.
I hope not.
Okay, that's enough. Okay, I got it. Holy shit. Oh,
you okay?
That's not funny.
You okay? Does it feel like a roller coaster?
Oh man, it did.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
But there's no build-up.
No.
It just
goes.
Holy shit. When do you do that?
All the time.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do.
No, you don't drive like that.
No, not all the time.
Oh my God. I thought it was gonna, what's the word, gradual.
Take off? Are you okay?
I think so.
Okay. So basically right there, that's the sport and insane mode, right?
How do you got an insane on the fucking car?
Isn't that crazy? Who puts an insane mode on the car? So basically, you know, you press that button.
So you ain't got to worry about you staging is simple because
no, you
this
just
ain't gonna roll.
there you go.
God damn it, that motherfucker accelerates
65 miles an hour. Right there.
This is faster than McLaren on the start, ain't it?
God? Oh, yeah.
God.
I mean, takes you by surprise, right?
Boy, that...
So that is the face of disruption today. What is interesting about this, and this is the reason, like, let's get serious about this. This is the reason why I think you need to be super careful if you are in an established company, because the face of disruption looks like this. You don't have time to react anymore. We work a lot with at Singularity University, we work a lot with the big car manufacturers, particularly the German ones. And I can tell you, about 2-3 years ago, I spoke to German car manufacturers and they were all like, yeah, Tesla, I don't care. And then they saw this. Literally, they saw insane mode. And then they started buying Teslas because they started reverse engineering them because they're scared shitless. If you're Porsche, a sports car manufacturer, and your Porsche car They have not a single car in their arsenal which is faster than this thing. And this is a 5 people carrying sedan. This is not a Porsche 911. Right? So, when you bring innovation to market, and this is for you entrepreneurs out here, you have to be careful about something called crossing the chasm. This is a guy called Geoffrey Moore who wrote a book under the same title 25 years ago. I believe this is more important today to understand than it was 25 years ago. It's a very simple model. I explain it to you. It works like this. As you bring a product to market, you sell it to different types of customers as the product matures. So in the beginning, this is the innovators. This is just you. And then you sell to early adopters. Early adopters are the crazy people like I am. I buy a product super early, and because I want to have it, I'm like a tech geek, and it's okay if it doesn't work. If I need to update the firmware, the batteries doesn't really work, it's all good, it's fine, because I know what I'm doing. And then you get to early majority. If you wear an Apple Watch today, you're early majority. You want to be cool, but the product needs to work. And then get to late majority. Late majority is my mom. My mom sees me wearing an Apple Watch and she's like, oh, I want to have one of those. But for her, the product really needs to work. And then you get to laggards. Laggards is my grandma who wants to buy a watch, but she can't buy anything else but a smartwatch because it's the only thing which is left. So here's the insight. The insight is that there is a massive gap, what we call a chasm, between the early adopters and the early majority. This is the reason why literally 99% of Silicon Valley startups fail, because what they never get to is, they never get to sell to the public, to the people who are not like them. It is important to understand this. Let me show you how this looks like in the real world, and I want to talk about cars again. The following video, this video here, this is an elderly lady who sits in a Tesla again, and the Tesla has self-driving mode activated, which is their autopilot feature. And her son is next to her and films the whole episode.
It's scary. Oh, there's cars coming. Oh, there's cars. Ah! Bill, just put me back for me control it. Oh, dear Jesus. I could never. Oh, where's it going? God damn, Bill. Oh, my God. Oh, this is so scary. Oh, Jesus, this is my first day out and I'm about to die.
Oh, come on, relax.
So let me be super clear. Putting your mom into a situation where your mom says, I'm about to die, is not cool. Not cool at all. Filming it and then putting it on the internet so I can watch it, also not cool. The reason why I'm showing you this is this is the chasm. The chasm stares into your face. This is the reason why the current generation of self-driving cars, in my view, are doomed to fail. For a simple reason. Can you identify the chasm? It's this. The steering wheel moves by itself. It freaks you out. I was at Google when we released the self-driving car over at Google. I drove the self-driving car. It freaked me out because you're feeling completely out of control. Now, how do you overcome the chasm is an interesting question, right? So in this case, BMW could write on the steering wheel, hey, everything's cool, we're BMW, like, just chill. That might work, but it might not work. Another way to think about this is you can engineer, once you identify the chasm, you engineer around it, and then you build this thing here. This is Waymo's latest self-driving car. It doesn't have a steering wheel anymore. You put people in it, it looks like this.
We're like You said, relax. You don't need to do nothing. It knows when it needs to stop. It knows when it needs to go.
What she really liked was that it slowed down before it went around a curve and then accelerated in the curve. She's always trying to get me to do it that way.
That's the way I learned in a high school driver's ed.
So for you entrepreneurs out there, and of course every large company bringing a new product to market, if the product is disruptive, if it is something new which makes the old thing obsolete, of course, if you're doing a product which is just another variation of something which exists, you don't cross chasms. But if you do something new, you need to think about the chasm and how to overcome them. Let me give you an interesting example. Any one of you is familiar with pinch to zoom? Of course, right? It's the most intuitive gesture on the planet. If you ever have a chance to give a phone to a person who has never touched a phone before, like a smartphone, what you will find is that they don't ever understand pinch to zoom. Because pinch to zoom is a gesture you need to do once. You do it once, it becomes so like second nature that you do it all the time. To the extent that on my flight here, there was a kid next to me, and you know like the little screens they have on the plane? It was trying to do pinch to zoom, and of course that doesn't work because these screens are not touch sensitive. And then it started banging against the screen because it thought the screen was broken. So what did Apple do to make you understand pinch to zoom? They didn't engineer around it because it was a feature. What they did is they spent $100 million in educating you. Because every single TV ad they did when the iPhone came out, and you can see this today, they showed you pinch to zoom as a core feature. When you walked into an Apple store, the first thing they did was they gave you the iPhone. They were like, hey, you want to play with this? And then they showed you pinch to zoom. They said, like, look at this cool feature. Because once you did it once, you understand it. So you have to figure out where are these gaps, where are the chasms, and how do you overcome them? So let me close with a few thoughts. And this is more on a personal level. The first is this. For the first time in human history, individuals, people, and communities now have the same innovation power as large companies and even nation states. This is incredibly empowering. This is the reason why we started this thing called Fast Track, where we empower citizens in a city to take control and build incredible solutions. This is the reason why you as an entrepreneur can compete with the largest companies on this planet on their same footing. It's also, if you're in a large corporation, the reason why you need to wake up and do this because you have the resources to do stuff. This is really interesting and really powerful. I want to share another thing. This is a quote. This is an Irish playwright, a gentleman called George Bernard Shaw, who said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man and woman." You all have to be unreasonable in this world. And if there's a thing I wish for you, be unreasonable in this world. Because that is the only way we collectively change this world in the direction we want to change it. We're at this really interesting, weird intersection point. In a lot of technologies, we're at this point where the lines are crossing, and probably a little bit before, and probably in some areas even behind. I get one question, I get this all the time. People ask me, what do you think the future will be? What do you predict the future will be? And I always tell people one simple answer: I don't know. And I don't know for a simple reason, because the future is unwritten. That is the beauty of the future. Nobody has written the future yet. You are writing the future every single second of your life. The one thing I do know is that if you're not participating in writing the future will happen to you. And that is a pretty darn bad position to be in. Truly no fate but what we make. This is really powerful. We create the world we want to live in. I want to leave you with a last thought. So I have this interesting opportunity to work with the US Navy SEALs. And the US Navy SEALs, if you know, it's like a military unit. It's like the most elite unit on the planet, allegedly. I guess the Israelis are actually better. But what the US Navy SEALs have is they have a handbook. And in this handbook, you'll find a formula. And the formula says your rate of growth, and what they mean by that is your personal growth, you as an individual. Your rate of growth equals the magnitude of the challenge multiplied by the intensity of the attack. If you hold this true, and I fundamentally believe this to be true, I live my life after this, why wouldn't you pick the hardest problem you can possibly find and attack it as hard as you possibly can? Because that is how you grow. And what is life other than growing? So with this, I hope some of the things I said today made sense to you. Some of them not only entertained you, but hopefully made you think a little bit more. Hello? That's probably my mom texting. And I hope that some of the stuff I said was useful for you. With that, please do stay in touch. I'm a pretty sociable person. Thank you so much for having me, and I guess it's beer time.